Welcome, weary traveler, to another journey through the quieter corridors of history. Tonight, we drift back to the early 18th century, to those sun-bleached waters of the Caribbean and the Atlantic, where romance and reality rarely sailed together on the same tide. You've settled into your comfortable bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of modern life, the distant whisper of air conditioning, perhaps the soft glow of a bedside lamp, the reassuring weight of clean blankets. These simple luxuries would have seemed like impossible dreams to the men who chose the life of piracy 3 centuries ago. Imagine yourself now, not in your safe harbor of rest, but standing on creaking wooden planks, salt spray stinging your face, as we explore why you truly wouldn't survive a day as a pirate. This isn't the swashbuckling adventure of Hollywood's imagination, but the grinding, often brutal reality of life aboard vessels where hope and desperation sailed hand in hand. Tonight, we'll walk the weathered decks of these floating prisons, meet the infamous Blackbeard in the flesh, uncover the truth behind buried treasure, and finally find respite in the ordered world of His Majesty's Navy. Let the rhythm of imaginary waves and the creak of ancient timber carry you toward peaceful sleep where we begin this maritime journey into history's darker waters. Picture yourself waking not to the gentle warmth of morning sunlight through your bedroom window, but to the violent lurching of a wooden world beneath your feet. Your stomach immediately rebels against the constant motion, that sickening rise and fall, the sudden sideways pitch that sends loose objects sliding across the cramped space you call home. The seasickness begins before you're fully conscious, a queasy reminder that the ocean shows no mercy to those who dare to make it their permanent residence. The hammock you've slept in, if you can call it sleep, is barely 3 feet wide and suspended mere inches from the man beside you. The air is thick with the mingled scents of unwashed bodies, damp wood, and something far less pleasant, the ever-present aroma of the ship's bilge, where sea water, waste, and rotting matter create a cocktail of odors that would send a modern person running for fresh air. But there is no fresh air here, not really. Even on deck, the wind carries salt and spray, and the accumulated funk of dozens of men living in impossibly close quarters. You reach for breakfast, though your stomach churns at the thought. What awaits you is salt pork that has seen better months, stored in barrels and preserved in brine so concentrated it makes your mouth pucker before you've taken a bite. The meat is tough, stringy, and often tinged with an unappetizing grey color. Sometimes, if you're fortunate, there might be hardtack, those rock-hard biscuits that require soaking in whatever liquid is available to become even remotely edible. More often than not, these biscuits are alive with weevils, small white grubs that have made themselves at home in your meager rations. The experienced pirates learn to tap their hardtack against the table in dim light, waiting for the small white bodies to fall out before eating. In darkness, you simply crunch through whatever protein presents itself. Water, that most basic necessity of life, becomes a precious commodity yielding careful rations. The barrels that hold your drinking supply are breeding grounds for algae and bacteria. The water often tastes of wood and iron, with an underlying sweetness that speaks of decay. When the supply runs particularly low, you might find yourself grateful for the morning dew collected from the cells, or even more desperately, your own recycled fluids. The constant dehydration leaves your lips cracked and your tongue feeling thick and foreign in your mouth. The ship itself is a maze of hazards waiting to claim the unwary. Imagine trying to navigate in complete darkness between decks, where the ceiling is so low that even men of average height must walk in a permanent crouch. The wooden beams are unforgiving when your head connects with them during the ship's sudden movements. Splinters are a constant threat, long, sharp pieces of wood that penetrate skin and fester in the warm, moist environment of a working ship. Your hands become maps of cuts and calluses, evidence of daily battles with rough rope and splintered surfaces. The rope itself tells its own story of hardship. Hemp lines, thick as a man's wrist, must be hauled and secured countless times each day. The fibers bite into your palms, leaving them raw and bleeding. In cold weather, wet rope becomes your enemy, slippery and painful to grip. It slides through torn hands that have lost their feeling to the numbing cold. In tropical heat, the same rope becomes burning hot to the touch, capable of raising blisters on skin already damaged by sun and salt. Speaking of the sun, imagine its relentless presence in latitudes where shade is scarce and precious. The tropical sun beats down on the deck with an intensity that modern air-conditioned life has spared you from experiencing. Your skin, pale from whatever previous life brought you to piracy, burns and blisters repeatedly. There is no sunscreen, no protective clothing designed for such exposure. The lucky few might have broad-brimmed hats, but most make do with torn cloth wrapped around their heads. The sun reflects off the water in blinding sheets of light that burn your eyes and create mirages that dance on the horizon like false promises of land and safety. Disease moves through a pirate ship or unwelcome passenger who never disembarks. Scurvy, that cruel thief of vitamin C, begins its work within weeks of leaving port. Your gums become spongy and bleed at the slightest touch. Old wounds reopen as your body's ability to heal itself deteriorates. Teeth loosen in their sockets, and the simple act of eating becomes an exercise in pain. Your energy drains away gradually, leaving you weak and dizzy. Without fresh fruits or vegetables, luxury is impossible to preserve on long voyages. Scurvy claims its victims with systematic precision, but scurvy is just one member of disease's boarding party. Dysentery spreads rapidly in close quarters where privacy is non-existent and sanitation is primitive. The constant diarrhea and cramping leave men dehydrated and weak, fighting battles on two fronts, against enemy ships and against their own rebellious bodies. Typhus, carried by the rats that are permanent passengers on every vessel, brings fever and delirium. Men burn with internal fire, while their minds wander through landscapes of confusion and fear. The rats themselves deserve mention as unwelcome crew members. These creatures, perfectly adapted to ship life, outnumber the human occupants and fear them not at all. They feast on the same limited food supplies, contaminating far more than they consume. Their droppings and urine add to the ship's aromatic complexity, and their nocturnal activities provide a constant soundtrack of scratching and scurrying. Sleep becomes a light affair when you know that curious rodents might decide to investigate your hammock for scraps of food or interesting textures. Personal hygiene becomes a forgotten luxury from your previous life on land. Fresh water is too precious to waste on washing, and the salt water that surrounds you actually makes cleaning more difficult, leaving skin sticky and uncomfortable. Your clothes, the few garments you possess, become stiff with salt, sweat, and other accumulated substances. They chafe against skin that grows increasingly sensitive from constant exposure to rough fabrics and harsh conditions. Washing clothes in salt water is an exercise in futility. They may look marginally cleaner when wet, but dry to the same stiff, uncomfortable state. Your fellow pirates, the men you must live alongside in this floating prison, represent humanity at its most desperate edge. Many are escaped criminals, debtors fleeing their obligations, or simply men who found themselves with no other options in life. Violence simmers constantly beneath the surface of daily interactions. Arguments over food, sleeping space, or shares of plunder can escalate quickly to knife fights in quarters, to cramp to avoid confrontation. The captain's authority, while absolute, is maintained through fear and the promise of profit, both of which can evaporate quickly when luck runs out. The constant danger extends beyond interpersonal conflicts to the very nature of piracy itself. Every merchant vessel encountered might be your last if it carries more guns than anticipated. Naval patrols hunt pirates with single-minded determination, and capture means certain death at the end of a rope. The golden age of piracy exists primarily in the imagination of those who never lived it. For those aboard these vessels, each day might be their final sunrise. Sleep, when it comes, offers little genuine rest. The hammocks sway with every movement of the ship, and the sounds of wind through rigging, creaking timbers, and snoring shipmates create a symphony that takes weeks to grow accustomed to. Even then, true deep sleep remains elusive, when danger might appear at any moment, and all hands must be ready to leap into action. Dreams, when they visit, often carry you back to solid ground, to the simple pleasure of a bed that doesn't move, water that doesn't taste of decay, and food that isn't alive with insects. The psychological toll of such existence weighs as heavily as the physical hardships. Months at sea, surrounded by endless water and the same faces, create a peculiar form of isolation, despite the constant company. The horizon becomes both promise and taunt, suggesting lands beyond reach, while emphasizing the vast emptiness that surrounds your small wooden world. Men speak of previous lives in hushed tones, as if afraid that talking too loudly about the past might summon the authorities who drove them to this desperate choice. As you imagine yourself in this harsh reality, feeling the bite of salt spray and the gnaw of constant hunger, the appeal of piracy begins to dissolve like morning mist. The freedom promised by life beyond civilization's reach comes with a price measured in comfort, health, and often life itself. The romance of the seas reveals itself as a story told by those who never had to live its daily truth. Yet somehow, in the face of such hardship, some men not only survived, but became legends whose names echo through centuries. Among them, one figure towers above the rest, a man whose very name became synonymous with the terror and fascination of piracy's golden age. As our imaginary ship sails deeper into historical waters, we prepare to meet the most infamous pirate of them all, a man whose story illuminates both the brutality and the strange magnetism of life beyond the law. In the annals of piracy, no figure looms larger or casts a darker shadow than Edward Teach, the man history remembers as Blackbeard. His story begins not in the tropical waters, where he would earn his fearsome reputation, but likely in the English port city of Bristol, sometime around 1680. Imagine a young man growing up in the salt-scented streets near the harbour, watching tall ships arrive laden with cargo from distant lands, listening to sailors' tales of adventure and fortune beyond the horizon. Edward Teach's early years remained shrouded in the mists of incomplete records and deliberate obscurity. What we know suggests he came from humble beginnings, perhaps the son of a mariner or dock worker, raised in a world where the sea represented both opportunity and danger. The Bristol of his youth was a bustling port where legitimate trade and less savoury activities often walked hand in hand. Young Edward would have witnessed the harsh realities of maritime life from an early age. The widows waiting for ships that would never return. The broken men who came back from voyages changed by what they had seen and done. The call of the sea proved stronger than whatever ties bound him to land. By his early 20s, Teach had found his way aboard vessels, sailing the dangerous waters of the Caribbean. The transition from legitimate sailor to pirate was often a gradual one in those days, as the line between privateering, government-sanctioned piracy against enemy nations, and outright lawlessness could blur during times of shifting political winds. It was under the tutelage of Captain Benjamin Harnigold, a pirate of considerable reputation, that Edward Teach learned the deadly arts that would make him infamous. Harnigold operated from Nassau in the Bahamas, a lawless haven where pirates could careen their ships, divide their plunder, and plan their next ventures. Picture Nassau's harbour in 1716, crowded with vessels of every description, sleek sloops built for speed, captured merchant ships converted to piratical purposes, and the occasional man of war taken in bold attacks on naval forces. Harnigold recognized something in the young Bristol sailor that set him apart from the dozens of desperate men who sought their fortunes in piracy. Teach possessed not only physical courage, but also a keen tactical mind and an understanding of the psychological warfare that was often more valuable than cannon and cutlass. Under Harnigold's guidance, he learned to read the wind and weather, to navigate by stars, that to wield overhead in patterns his landlubber contemporaries would never master, and most importantly, to command the respect and fear of men who respected little and feared less. The transformation of Edward Teach into Blackbeard was as much about theatre as it was about terror. His physical presence was formidable enough. Contemporary accounts describe him as tall for his era, perhaps 6 feet in height, with broad shoulders and arms made powerful by years of hauling rope and wielding heavy weapons. But it was his carefully cultivated appearance that elevated him from ordinary pirate to legend. That magnificent beard, black as a moonless night and carefully maintained, despite the harsh conditions of ship life, became his signature. He would braid it with colored ribbons, hemp fibers dyed with whatever materials were at hand. Before battle, he would weave slow-burning hemp matches into the beard itself, creating an aura of smoke around his face that made him appear as some demon conjured from the depths of hell. The effect was calculated and devastating. Imagine facing such an apparition across the deck of your merchant vessel, a towering figure wreathed in smoke, multiple pistols thrust through his belt, cutlass gleaming in his hand, and those dark eyes promising violence beyond measure. By 1717, Honigold had decided to accept a royal pardon and retire from piracy, but Edward Teach had tasted power and found it to his liking. He broke away from his mentor, taking command of a captured sloop and gathering around him a crew of the most desperate and dangerous men the Caribbean had to offer. His recruitment methods were as ruthless as they were effective. He sought out men with nothing left to lose, escaped slaves who faced death if recaptured, deserters from naval vessels who would hang if caught, debtors whose only choices were prison or the grave. The ship that would make Blackbeard's reputation was originally named La Concorde, a French slave ship that he captured off the island of St. Vincent. Under his command, she was rechristened Queen Anne's Revenge, and under his direction, she was transformed into a floating fortress. 40 guns bristled from her sides, making her one of the most heavily armed pirate vessels of the age. The conversion of a slave ship to a pirate flagship carries its own grim symbolism, a vessel designed to transport human misery repurposed for a different kind of predation. From his base in Nassau, Blackbeard began the campaign that would make his name synonymous with terror throughout the Atlantic shipping lanes. His tactics were as much psychological as they were physical. The sight of his distinctive black flag, featuring a skeleton holding an hourglass in one hand and a spear pointed at a bleeding heart in the other, was often enough to persuade merchant crews to surrender without a fight. The message was clear: time was running out, and resistance would be met with pain and death. But Blackbeard understood that reputation was a delicate thing that required careful maintenance. Stories of his cruelty spread through the taverns and docks where sailors gathered, each telling growing more elaborate than the last. Some accounts were undoubtedly true. The man was capable of shocking violence when it served his purposes. Other stories were likely embellishments, but Blackbeard made no effort to correct them. In the world of piracy, being feared was often more valuable than being loved, and certainly safer than being underestimated. One tale that exemplifies both his cunning and his theatrical nature involves his relationship with his own crew. Recognizing that familiarity could breed contempt, and that his men might grow comfortable enough to challenge his authority, Blackbeard would occasionally stage demonstrations of his dangerous unpredictability. In one famous incident, he allegedly gathered several crew members in his cabin, drew his pistols, and shot his own first mate Israel Hands in the knee without warning or apparent provocation. When questioned about his motives, he reportedly replied that if he didn't kill one of them now and then, they would forget who he was. The story, whether entirely true or not, served its purpose. Word spread through the pirate community that Blackbeard was as dangerous to his friends as to his enemies, a man whose moods were as unpredictable as the weather and twice as deadly. This reputation for volatile violence was carefully balanced with generosity toward those who served him faithfully and demonstrations of tactical brilliance that kept his crews loyal despite their fear. His greatest triumph came in May of 1718, when he effectively held the port city of Charleston, South Carolina, hostage. Blackbeard positioned his fleet at the mouth of Charleston Harbor, capturing every vessel that attempted to enter or leave. For nearly a week, the commerce of one of the American colony's most important ports ground to a complete halt. The psychological impact was immense. Here was a pirate bold enough to challenge not just individual ships, but an entire colonial city. The ransom he demanded was telling in its modesty and practicality. Rather than gold or silver, Blackbeard demanded a chest of medical supplies. This request reveals something about the harsh realities of pirate life that romantic tales often overlook. Disease and injury were constant companions aboard pirate vessels. Unqualified medical care was virtually non-existent. The medicines he sought, mercury for treating syphilis, laudanum for pain, surgical instruments for battlefield medicine, were worth their weight in gold to men living beyond the reach of civilization's healing arts. Charleston's authorities, faced with economic ruin and lacking the naval force to challenge Blackbeard's fleet, had little choice but to comply. The successful blockade demonstrated to the world that pirates had grown powerful enough to challenge colonial governments directly. It also marked the beginning of the end for Blackbeard's career, as such boldness inevitably drew the attention of authorities who could no longer afford to ignore the pirate threat. Following the Charleston triumph, Blackbeard made what seemed like a shrewd political move. He sailed to North Carolina and accepted a royal pardon from Governor Charles Eden, ostensibly retiring from piracy to become a respectable citizen. He even married a young local woman, though this was reportedly his 14th such union, suggesting that his commitment to respectability had certain limitations. But retirement did not suit Edward Teach. The lure of easy plunder and the addiction to the power that came with commanding desperate men proved too strong to resist. Within months, he was back at sea, using his official pardon as cover for renewed piratical activities. He formed alliances with corrupt colonial officials, including Governor Eden himself, who provided protection in exchange for a share of the profits. This return to piracy would prove to be his final mistake. Virginia's Governor Alexander Spotswood, lacking North Carolina's tolerance for piratical activities, decided that Blackbeard represented a threat that could no longer be ignored. In November of 1718, he commissioned Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy to hunt down and eliminate the infamous pirate once and for all. Lieutenant Maynard was given command of 2 armed sloops, HMS Pearl and HMS Lime, and tasked with what many considered a suicide mission. Blackbeard's reputation was such that few believed any single expedition could succeed against him. But Maynard was a professional naval officer, trained in tactics that pirates, despite their cunning, rarely matched. He understood that Blackbeard's greatest weapons, fear and reputation, could be neutralized through careful planning and disciplined execution. The final confrontation came at Ocracoke Inlet, North Carolina, on November 22, 1718. Blackbeard had anchored his sloop Adventure in the shallow waters of the inlet, believing himself safe from pursuit by larger naval vessels. The location was well chosen from a tactical standpoint. The shallow water and treacherous currents made approach difficult for unfamiliar ships, while providing Blackbeard with intimate knowledge of escape routes should retreat become necessary. But Maynard had done his homework. He had studied the local waters and chosen his vessels specifically for their shallow draft. As dawn broke over the inlet, Blackbeard found himself facing not the clumsy pursuit he had expected, but a carefully planned assault by professional naval forces. The battle that followed was brief but savage. Maynard's initial approach was met with devastating cannon fire from Adventure, which killed or wounded much of the crew aboard Pearl. But the lieutenant had anticipated this, ordering most of his men to remain below decks, presenting the appearance of a vessel more damaged than it actually was. When Blackbeard moved in for what he believed would be the final blow, Maynard sprang his trap. Hidden sailors burst from below decks, turning what the pirate had expected to be a massacre into a fierce hand-to-hand battle. The deck of Adventure became a scene of desperate combat, with cutlasses ringing against naval swords and pistol shots echoing across the water. In the midst of this chaos, Edward Teach and Robert Maynard met in personal combat. Here was the culmination of Blackbeard's legend, a final duel between the most notorious pirate of his age and a determined representative of legal authority. Contemporary accounts suggest that Blackbeard fought with the fury of a cornered animal, his great black beard streaming in the wind, his multiple pistols speaking death to any who came within range. But even legends must eventually yield to reality. Maynard, trained in European swordplay and backed by disciplined naval fighters, gradually gained the upper hand. The end came suddenly, a sword thrust that found its mark, followed by Blackbeard's collapse to the blood-slicked deck of his own vessel. The aftermath was as brutal as the battle itself. Maynard ordered Blackbeard's head severed from his body, both as proof of his death and as a warning to other pirates. The grisly trophy was hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's vessel for the journey back to Virginia, where it would be displayed as evidence that even the most fearsome pirates were not beyond the reach of justice. The body, according to legend, was thrown overboard, where it reportedly swam around the ship 3 times before finally sinking beneath the waves. This tale, almost certainly apocryphal, speaks to the hold that Blackbeard's legend had taken on the popular imagination. Even in death, people needed to believe that he possessed supernatural powers that set him apart from ordinary mortals. Edward Teach's piratical career had lasted less than 2 years, but in that brief time, he had become the template for every pirate legend that would follow. His story reveals both the terrible appeal and the inevitable tragedy of the piratical life. Here was a man who rose from humble beginnings to command fleets and challenge governments, who inspired both loyalty and terror, who lived by his own rules in an age when most men had little choice in their destinies. Yet for all his success, his end came as it came to most pirates, violently, surrounded by enemies, far from any safe harbor. The freedom he had seized came with a price that he ultimately paid in full, measured in blood on a lonely inlet where the wind and waves continued their eternal conversation, indifferent to the human dramas that play out upon their surface. As we drift away from Blackbeard's final battle, imagine the sudden silence that fell over Ocracoke Inlet after the guns stopped speaking. The water lapping against wooden hulls, the cry of seabirds wheeling overhead, the gentle sound of wind through rigging, all testimony to how quickly human passion and violence can give way to nature's deeper rhythms. In that silence, we prepare to explore another aspect of pirate legend, one that has captured imaginations for centuries with its promise of treasure hidden beneath tropical sands. Close your eyes and picture the scene that has captivated imaginations for centuries: a moonlit beach, palm trees swaying in the tropical breeze, and shadowy figures gathered around a freshly dug hole in the sand. The captain, his face weathered by salt and sun, carefully lowers a heavy chest into the earth, while his trusted crew looks on in silence. Maps are drawn on parchment, marked with cryptic symbols and mysterious X's, then sealed away for some future day, when the treasure might be reclaimed. This romantic vision of buried pirate treasure has become so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness that we rarely pause to ask the most basic question: did pirates actually bury their treasure? The answer, like so many truths about the golden age of piracy, is far more complex and considerably less romantic than the stories would have us believe. To understand why the legend of buried treasure took such firm hold on the popular imagination, we must first examine the harsh economic realities that drove men to piracy and shaped how they handled the wealth they acquired through their dangerous trade. Imagine yourself as a pirate captain who has just captured a Spanish treasure ship laden with silver from the mines of Potosi. Your crew has risked everything for this moment: months at sea, battles with naval forces, the constant threat of disease and death. Now, finally, success has crowned your efforts, and chests of precious metal sit on your deck, gleaming in the Caribbean sunlight. What do you do with this wealth? The popular image suggests you would immediately sail to some isolated beach and bury the treasure for safekeeping. But consider the practical realities of such a course of action. Your crew, men who have spent months living on salt pork and brackish water, who have faced cannon fire and cutlass blade for their share of the prize, are unlikely to be patient about enjoying the fruits of their labor. These are not men who think in terms of long-term investment strategies or retirement planning. They are desperate individuals living from one raid to the next, never knowing if the current voyage might be their last. The truth is that most pirate treasure was spent almost as quickly as it was acquired, dissipated in the taverns, brothels, and gaming houses of ports like Port Royal, Nassau, and Tortuga. Picture these havens of piratical activity, ramshackle settlements where fortunes changed hands nightly, where men who had been wealthy at sunset might find themselves penniless by dawn. The temporary nature of pirate wealth was legendary even in their own time. Contemporary observers noted with amazement how quickly successful pirates could squander fortunes that would have set a respectable merchant up for life. This pattern of rapid spending was not merely the result of poor financial judgment, though pirates were rarely known for their fiscal restraint. The very nature of their profession made long-term wealth accumulation extremely difficult. Pirates could not simply deposit their earnings in banks or invest in legitimate enterprises without risking exposure to authorities who might ask uncomfortable questions about the source of their wealth. They could not own property openly or engage in the sort of commerce that would allow their money to grow through investment. Moreover, the pirate lifestyle demanded immediate gratification as a psychological necessity. Men who faced death regularly, who knew that their next battle might be their last, developed a philosophy of living for the moment. Why save for a future that might never come? Why deny yourself present pleasures when tomorrow might bring the hangman's noose or a watery grave? This mindset, while understandable given their circumstances, virtually guaranteed that pirate wealth would be ephemeral. Yet despite these realities, the legend of buried treasure persisted, and there are historical reasons why this myth took such firm root. The few documented cases of pirates actually burying treasure became the foundation upon which a much larger mythology was constructed. The most famous of these cases involves Captain William Kidd, a figure whose story perfectly illustrates the gap between historical fact and popular legend. William Kidd was originally commissioned as a privateer, authorized by the English crown to hunt pirates in the waters around Madagascar and the Red Sea. But the line between legitimate privateering and outright piracy was often blurred, and Kidd found himself accused of crossing that line when he captured the Quedagh Merchant, a ship sailing under French passes, but owned by subjects of the Great Mogul. Political winds shifted, and suddenly Kidd found himself branded as a pirate rather than celebrated as a patriot. Faced with the prospect of arrest and trial, Kidd did indeed bury a portion of his treasure. But this was not the romantic gesture of legend. Instead, it was a desperate gambit by a man who hoped to use the buried wealth as a bargaining chip in negotiations with colonial authorities. He buried the treasure on Gardiner's Island, off the coast of Long Island, and attempted to use its location as leverage to secure a pardon. The strategy failed spectacularly. The authorities recovered the treasure, tried Kidd for piracy and murder, and eventually hanged him at Execution Dock in London. This single, documented case of buried pirate treasure became the seed from which countless other tales would grow. But it's important to note that even in Kidd's case, the burial was not part of any grand romantic plan, but rather the desperate act of a man trying to avoid the gallows. The treasure was not left buried 4 years to age like fine wine. It was recovered within months and used as evidence against its owner. The transformation of this pragmatic act into romantic legend began almost immediately. Popular broadsides and pamphlets of the early 18th century seized upon Kidd's story, embellishing it with details that made for better reading but bore little resemblance to historical fact. Maps began to appear, purportedly drawn by Kidd himself, showing the locations of other buried treasures. These maps were, without exception, forgeries created by enterprising publishers who understood that tales of hidden wealth sold better than accurate historical accounts. As the 18th century progressed, the legend of buried treasure became increasingly divorced from historical reality. Every unexplained wealth that appeared in coastal communities was attributed to discovered pirate treasure. Every mysterious map that surfaced was claimed to show the location of some captain's buried hoard. The popular imagination, fed by sensational literature and theatrical presentations, created an elaborate mythology around the idea of treasure islands and buried gold. The publication of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island in 1883 marked the culmination of this mythological process. Stevenson's masterful adventure story, with its memorable characters and vivid descriptions of tropical islands and buried gold, became the definitive version of the pirate treasure story for generations of readers. The book was so influential that many people today believe its fictional elements are historical fact. The idea of treasure maps marked with X's, the image of pirates burying chests on remote beaches, the concept of detailed directions hidden in cryptic clues, all of these elements come not from historical documentation, but from Stevenson's imagination. Archaeological evidence has done little to support the treasure burial myth. Despite countless expeditions to islands throughout the Caribbean and beyond, despite sophisticated metal detecting equipment and careful archaeological surveys, no significant pirate treasure hoards have ever been discovered. The few coins and artifacts that have been found are more likely the result of shipwrecks than deliberate burial. The ocean floor, particularly in areas where pirates were active, has yielded far more in terms of historical artifacts than any land-based treasure hunt. This absence of archaeological evidence becomes more understandable when we consider the practical challenges that would have faced any pirate attempting to bury treasure. First, there was the simple problem of tools and labor. Digging a hole large enough and deep enough to accommodate a treasure chest would have required considerable time and effort, particularly in the sandy soils of tropical beaches. Pirates, operating under constant threat of pursuit, rarely had the luxury of extended stays in any one location. More significantly, there was the problem of security and retrieval. A buried treasure is only valuable if it can be recovered safely, and pirates faced enormous challenges in both respects. Creating an accurate map required surveying skills that most pirates lacked, and even accurate maps could become useless if landmarks changed or if the person who drew the map died before the treasure could be recovered. The tropical environments where pirates operated were particularly hostile to long-term storage. Salt air corroded metal, moisture damaged organic materials, and shifting sands could bury landmarks beyond recognition. The social dynamics of pirate crews also worked against treasure burial. Pirates operated under democratic systems when major decisions required majority approval. Convincing a crew of desperate men to bury their hard-won treasure rather than spend it immediately would have required extraordinary leadership skills and compelling circumstances. Even if a crew agreed to burial, the secret would have to be kept among dozens of men, many of whom might leave the crew or be captured and tortured for information. Perhaps most importantly, pirates understood that their profession was inherently temporary. Unlike legitimate businessmen who could plan for decades of steady income, pirates knew that their careers would likely end in death or capture within a few years. Under these circumstances, the rational strategy was to enjoy wealth while they had it, not to save it for a retirement that would probably never come. The few cases where pirates might have had incentive to bury treasure, such as when carrying more wealth than they could easily transport or when facing immediate pursuit, were exactly the situations where careful map-making and landmark recording would have been most difficult. A pirate fleeing from naval forces would have been more concerned with immediate escape than with creating detailed records for future treasure hunters. Economic analysis also argues against the buried treasure myth. The Spanish treasure fleets that provided much of the wealth targeted by Caribbean pirates carried their cargo in forms that were not particularly suited to long-term burial. Silver pieces of 8, while durable, were heavy and bulky. Precious stones and jewelry, while more portable, were also more easily stolen by individual crew members. Manufactured goods like silk, spices, and exotic woods were valuable but perishable. None of these forms of wealth were ideal for underground storage in tropical climates. Modern treasure hunting, despite its romantic appeal and the sophisticated technology now available, has consistently failed to produce evidence of buried pirate hoards. Professional archaeologists and historians who have investigated supposed treasure sites have found that the vast majority of treasure maps and location stories can be traced to 19th and 20th century fabrications rather than historical sources. The few cases where genuine artifacts have been discovered are more readily explained by shipwrecks or trading activities than by deliberate burial. The persistence of the buried treasure myth, despite this lack of evidence, speaks to something deeper in human psychology than simple historical curiosity. The idea of hidden wealth waiting to be discovered appeals to fundamental fantasies about luck, adventure, and sudden transformation of fortune. In an age when most people's economic prospects were limited by birth and circumstance, the possibility of finding buried treasure offered hope for dramatic improvement in life circumstances. The myth also serves as a metaphor for the broader appeal of the pirate life itself. Just as buried treasure promises wealth without honest labor, piracy offered the possibility of riches without the slow accumulation of legitimate business. Both represent fantasy escapes from the mundane realities of ordinary life, which may explain why both have maintained their hold on popular imagination, given their historical context has faded. As our imaginary shovels scrape against empty sand and our metal detectors fall silent over barren beaches, we might reflect on what the search for pirate treasure reveals about our own desires and dreams. Perhaps the real treasure lies not in some buried chest of Spanish gold, but in the human capacity for hope and imagination that keeps us searching despite all evidence to the contrary. The pirates themselves, practical men facing practical problems, understood this truth in their own way. They buried no treasure because they knew that the only wealth worth having was the wealth that could be enjoyed in the present moment, under the warm Caribbean sun, with loyal comrades and strong drink close at hand. The romance of buried treasure may be a myth, but it connects us to something authentic about the human experience, the desire to believe that somewhere, somehow, fortune awaits those bold enough to seek it. As we leave behind these empty beaches and abandoned dig sites, we carry with us not disappointment, but a deeper understanding of why some legends prove more durable than the facts that should have buried them long ago. In the gentle rhythm of waves washing over sand that has never yielded its secrets, we find a kind of peace. The treasure hunters of centuries past have long since returned to dust, their maps and theories proven false, but the ocean continues its patient work, smoothing the beaches and keeping whatever secrets the depths may hold. From the chaos and desperation of piratical life, we now turn to its antithesis, the ordered, disciplined world of His Majesty's Royal Navy. Imagine yourself awakening not in a swaying hammock surrounded by unwashed desperadoes, but in a proper cabin aboard HMS Seraphim, a 40-gun frigate on patrol in Caribbean waters during the year 1720. The contrast between your new circumstances and the piratical existence we have explored could hardly be more pronounced. Your awakening comes not to the random sounds of a lawless crew, but to the precisely timed notes of the ship's bell marking the changing of the watch. 6 bells of the morning watch, 7 o'clock by shore reckoning, and the day begins with the reassuring predictability that forms the backbone of naval life. Outside your cabin door, you can hear the measured tread of the marine sentry, his footsteps marking time in the eternal rhythm of military discipline. As a lieutenant in His Majesty's Navy, you possess something that no pirate, regardless of his success or reputation, can ever truly claim: legitimate authority backed by the full power of the Crown. Your commission, signed by the Admiralty and bearing the Royal Seal, represents not merely personal advancement, but participation in an institution that spans the globe and enforces the will of the most powerful empire in the world. This authority comes with responsibilities that would be foreign to any pirate captain. Obligations not just to your immediate crew, but to a chain of command that stretches from your quarterdeck to the throne room in London. Your day begins with the morning inspection, a ritual that would be impossible aboard any pirate vessel. Accompanied by the ship's master and the marine sergeant, you walk the length and breadth of HMS Seraphim, examining everything from the condition of the rigging to the cleanliness of the gun decks. The crew, dressed in their regulation blue jackets and white trousers, stand at attention as you pass. Their faces, while weathered by sea and sun like those of any sailor, lack the desperate, feral quality that marks men who have placed themselves beyond the law. The ship herself reflects the fundamental difference between legitimate naval service and piratical opportunism. Every rope has its proper place, every cannon its designated position, every barrel and casket's assigned location in the hold. This organization is not merely aesthetic, it represents the accumulated wisdom of centuries of naval warfare, refined through countless battles and voyages into a system that maximizes both efficiency and survival. When HMS Seraphim clears for action, every man knows exactly where he belongs and what he must do. There is no confusion, no debate, no wasted motion that might mean the difference between victory and defeat. The morning meal provides another stark contrast to pirate fare. While the basic ingredients, salt pork, hardtack, and small beer, might seem similar to those found aboard pirate vessels, the preparation and distribution reveal important differences. The ship's cook, appointed by the captain and answerable to naval regulations, prepares meals according to established procedures designed to prevent food poisoning and maintain nutritional standards. The portions, while modest, are calculated by naval physicians to sustain men through the rigors of sea duty. Most importantly, the distribution of food follows strict protocols that prevent the favoritism and violence that often accompany mealtimes aboard pirate ships. Your breakfast, taken in the wardroom with the other commissioned officers, consists of fresh eggs purchased at the last port, coffee sweetened with sugar from Barbados, and bread baked in the ship's own ovens. This civilized meal, served on actual plates with proper utensils, would represent unimaginable luxury to men accustomed to eating salt pork with their fingers while sitting on coiled rope. The conversation around the wardroom table reflects the broader concerns of educated gentlemen, discussions of navigation, weather patterns, the political situation in various colonies, and the latest dispatches from the Admiralty. Following breakfast, you turn your attention to the morning's lessons with the midshipmen. These young gentlemen, some barely 14 years old, represent the future of the Royal Navy. Unlike pirate crews, which relied on recruiting from the dregs of port cities and the outcasts of legitimate society, the Navy invested heavily in the education and development of its future leaders. The midshipmen under your instruction come from respectable families, possess at least basic literacy, and are expected to master not only seamanship, but also mathematics, navigation, languages, and the principles of leadership. The lesson takes place on the quarterdeck, where practical instruction combines with theoretical knowledge. You demonstrate the use of the quadrant for determining the ship's latitude, explain the calculation of longitude using the ship's chronometer, and quiz the young men on the proper procedures for signaling other vessels. This educational process, formal and systematic, stands in sharp contrast to the haphazard way that pirate recruits learn their trade. Pirates might become skilled sailors through experience, but they rarely acquired the comprehensive understanding of naval science that marked professional officers. As the morning progresses, your duties shift to the administrative tasks that consume much of a naval officer's time. The ship's log must be updated with precise records of weather conditions, course changes, and significant events. Supply requisitions require your signature and forwarding to the appropriate authorities. Letters from family, forwarded through the complex network of naval communications, await your attention. This paperwork, tedious as it might seem, represents something that pirates entirely lacked: accountability to higher authority and integration into a larger system of governance and law. The noon observation provides a perfect example of naval precision and professionalism. At exactly 12 o'clock, you join the captain and the ship's navigator on the quarterdeck to determine the vessel's exact position using the sun's altitude. The process requires expensive, precision instruments, a reflecting telescope, carefully calibrated chronometer, and detailed charts produced by the hydrographic office. The calculations involve complex mathematics that would be beyond most pirates' capabilities. The results are recorded in multiple logs and will eventually be forwarded to the Admiralty, contributing to the vast database of navigational knowledge that gives the Royal Navy its advantage over less systematic opponents. The afternoon brings the most distinctive aspect of naval life: the constant drilling and preparation for battle. Unlike pirates, who fought when circumstances demanded and often relied on surprise and intimidation rather than disciplined combat, naval crews practiced their deadly arts daily. The gun crews run through their loading and firing procedures with clockwork precision. Each man knows his exact position and responsibility, from the powder monkeys who carry charges from the magazine to the gun captains who aim and fire the great cannons. You observe these drills with the eye of a professional warrior, noting the smooth coordination that allows your crew to fire 3 broadsides in the time it would take a pirate crew to manage one. This superiority is not accidental. It represents years of training, standardized procedures, and the accumulated experience of the world's most successful naval fighting force. When HMS Seraphim encounters pirates, as she inevitably will, this professional competence will prove decisive. The afternoon also brings time for the small ceremonies that bind naval communities together. A sailor who has shown particular courage or competence might be recommended for promotion. Another who has violated ship's discipline faces captain's mast, where his case will be heard according to established naval law rather than the arbitrary justice of pirate captains. These proceedings, formal and predictable, represent the rule of law extended onto the ocean's lawless expanse. Your evening meal, taken again in the wardroom, continues the civilized routine that marks naval life. Tonight, the ship's purser has managed to procure fresh fruit from a recent port visit, providing some protection against scurvy. Wine purchased from the ship's stores accompanies the meal, and the conversation turns to literature and philosophy as much as professional matters. Several officers are reading the same novel, purchased from a bookseller in Port Royal, and their discussion of its merits would not be out of place in a London coffee house. After dinner, you might join other officers for a game of whist, the stakes modest and the atmosphere collegial. Or perhaps you will retire to your cabin to work on the charts that represent a labor of love as much as professional necessity. Many naval officers become accomplished cartographers, contributing to the expanding knowledge of global waters that gives Britain its maritime supremacy. Your charts, carefully drawn and meticulously detailed, will outlive your service and help guide future generations of sailors. The evening watch brings its own duties and pleasures. As you make your rounds of the ship, checking on the watch stations and ensuring that all is secure for the night, you observe the quiet efficiency of a well-run vessel. The lookouts scan the horizon with trained eyes, alert for any sign of suspicious sails. The helmsman maintains course with subtle adjustments that speak of years of experience. The marine sentries patrol their beats with measured steps that echo through the ship's passages. Your cabin, when you finally retire to it, represents a sanctuary of civilization that would be impossible aboard a pirate vessel. Books line one bulkhead: novels, works of philosophy, technical treatises on navigation and gunnery, and the accumulated wisdom of your professional education. A small writing desk holds correspondence with family and fellow officers, maintaining connections that link you to the larger world of British society. Your uniform, carefully maintained by your servant, hangs ready for tomorrow's duties. its gold lace and brass buttons marking your position in the rigid hierarchy that governs naval life. The night sounds aboard HMS Seraphim tell their own story of order and security. The measured strikes of the ship's bell marking the passage of time. The gentle creaking of well-maintained timber and rigging. The soft murmur of conversation among the watchkeepers. These sounds, familiar and reassuring, provide a stark contrast to the chaotic cacophony that marks pirate ships, where violence might erupt at any moment and sleep comes uneasily to men who trust no one completely. As you drift toward sleep in your comfortable bunk, your dreams are not haunted by the fears that plague pirate crews. You do not worry that your shipmates might murder you for your share of the plunder, or that enemy warships might appear without warning on the horizon. Your commission protects you, your skill advances you, and your service to the Crown provides both purpose and security. The Royal Navy offers something that piracy never can, a future that extends beyond the next prize, a career that might lead to advancement and honor, and the satisfaction of serving something greater than personal greed. The contrast between your orderly existence and the chaos we have explored in pirate life extends beyond mere comfort to fundamental questions of purpose and meaning. As a naval officer, your victories serve not only your personal advancement, but the broader interests of empire and civilization. When you capture a pirate vessel, you are not merely eliminating a competitor, but striking a blow for law and order against the forces of anarchy. When you protect merchant shipping, you defend the commerce that binds together the civilized world. Pirates, for all their temporary successes and romantic legends, remain fundamentally parasitic. They create nothing, protect nothing, and contribute nothing to the advancement of human knowledge or civilization. Their brief careers burn brightly, but leave no lasting legacy except cautionary tales and empty legends. The Royal Navy, by contrast, represents the accumulated wisdom and power of a great nation, channeled through institutions that have proven their worth across centuries of conflict and exploration. The morning will bring new duties, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve with honor. HMS Seraphim will continue her patrol, ready to enforce His Majesty's law in waters where pirates once thought themselves beyond the reach of justice. Your commission, your education, and your dedication to professional excellence make you part of the force that will eventually drive piracy from the seas, replacing chaos with order, lawlessness with justice, and desperate opportunism with legitimate authority. In the gentle motion of a well-found ship sailing through calm seas, in the soft breathing of sleeping sailors who trust their safety to competent leadership, in the quiet satisfaction of duty well performed, we find the true victory over the piratical chaos that once threatened to overwhelm the maritime world. The age of piracy is ending, not in some dramatic final battle, but in the steady accumulation of professional competence, institutional wisdom, and legitimate authority that makes HMS Seraphim and ships like her the masters of the ocean's highways. The last watch of the night calls softly through the ship, and all is well. Tomorrow will bring new horizons, new duties, and new opportunities to serve the Crown with honor. In this ordered world of discipline and purpose, we find peace, and so our journey through the treacherous waters of pirate history draws to a close, like a ship returning to safe harbor after a long and perilous voyage. We began this evening by asking whether you could survive a day as a pirate, and through the quiet hours we have spent together, the answer has emerged with the clarity of dawn breaking over a calm sea. You would not have survived a day as a pirate, not because you lack courage or resourcefulness, but because the romantic vision of piratical life bears so little resemblance to its harsh reality. We have walked the cramped, disease-ridden decks where desperate men lived in constant fear of violence, starvation, and death. We have witnessed the brief, brutal career of Blackbeard, whose legend grew as much from theatrical performance as from genuine terror. We have searched empty beaches for treasure that was never buried, understanding finally that the greatest treasures, security, comfort, and peaceful sleep, are the ones we take for granted. and we have found refuge in the ordered world of His Majesty's Navy, where discipline and duty created the very civilization that makes our comfortable contemplation of these dark chapters possible. The pirates of the Golden Age were not the swashbuckling heroes of popular imagination, but men driven to desperate extremes by circumstances beyond their control. They lived lives of extraordinary hardship punctuated by brief moments of violent triumph, always knowing that their careers would likely end at the gallows or beneath the waves. Their legacy is not one of romantic adventure, but of human desperation transformed by legend into something far more palatable than the truth. Yet in examining their world so closely, we have perhaps gained something more valuable than mere historical knowledge. We have come to appreciate the extraordinary luxury of the life you will return to when morning comes, clean water flowing from a tap, food preserved by refrigeration rather than salt, medicine available to heal rather than merely dull pain, and above all, the peace that comes from living under the protection of law and order rather than the arbitrary will of desperate men. The ocean that once carried pirates to their uncertain destinies continues its eternal work, washing the shores of islands where their ships once anchored, erasing with each tide the temporary marks that human ambition leaves upon the world. In its vast indifference to human schemes and dreams, we find a kind of comfort. The waves that witnessed Blackbeard's final battle still roll toward shore with the same gentle persistence, caring nothing for the legends that have grown around events that, in the ocean's long memory, happened only moments ago. As you sink deeper into the comfort of your bed, surrounded by the simple luxuries that make modern life possible, let the rhythm of imaginary waves carry you toward peaceful sleep. You are safe from the dangers that haunted every moment of pirate life, safe from disease and violence, from hunger and thirst, from the terrible uncertainty that marked every sunrise for men who lived beyond the reach of civilization's protecting embrace. The golden age of piracy ended not with some climactic battle, but with the quiet triumph of order over chaos, law over lawlessness, civilization over anarchy. In your warm bed, in your secure home, in the peaceful night that surrounds you, that victory continues. You are the beneficiary of centuries of human struggle to create a world where strength serves justice rather than mere appetite, where tomorrow can be planned for rather than merely hoped for, where sleep comes easily to those who have no need to fear their fellow human beings. Let the ghosts of pirates pass sail untoward, whatever distant shores await them in history's vast ocean. Their time is ended, their struggles finished, their desperate dreams dissolved like morning mist. Your dreams, when they come, will be gentler visions, untroubled by the harsh realities that made their brief lives so difficult and their legends so enduring. Sleep well, safe in the knowledge that you live in an age when the ocean's highways are patrolled by legitimate authority rather than lawless predators, when justice sails in well-armed ships, and when the most dangerous journey most of us will ever undertake is the gentle voyage from waking consciousness to peaceful dreams. The tide is turning, the harbour lights are dimming, and all is well. Good night.